Top Gun is a 1986 Jerry Bruckheimer produced action film starring Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer. The film follows Maverick, played by Cruise, the best fighter pilot ever, but he has to learn to follow the rules. He then has sex with his teacher, making him the ultimate Chad. The film was directed by Tony Scott. Alright guys, welcome back to Garage Movie Reviews, where every week we kind of just explore a random movie that's on my mind. Today we're talking about Top Gun, and as you can tell by the intro, I had a very tongue-in-cheek intro there. I have some criticisms with this film. This is actually the first time I ever watched Top Gun, which is surprising because I'm a pretty massive Tom Cruise fan. Most of my friends say that I'm a little too much of a Tom Cruise fan. Take it as you will. I love the Mission Impossible movies. I've seen all of them. But for some reason, I just never watched Top Gun, and I think it's because it had a very 80s cheese vibe. And I'm not a fan of Jerry Bruckheimer produced films. Jerry Bruckheimer is the producer here, and he has a very unique style when it comes to big budget filmmaking. When Jerry Bruckheimer produces a film, you can kind of tell that Jerry Bruckheimer produces it. And it's been the subject of parody multiple times. One parody that comes into mind is Team America World's Police. That movie was very much poking fun at the Jerry Bruckheimer style. And this movie is basically the epitome of Jerry Bruckheimer films. And I think it was that was kind of making me not really into watching this movie until now. Another reason is because early Tom Cruise action movies don't really have him do as much stunts as movies like Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol, or basically any other Mission Impossible movie that came after that. So when I see a Tom Cruise action movie, I really want to see him do his own stunts. That's basically the draw of Tom Cruise. That's not to say I'm only a fan of Tom Cruise as an action hero. I actually really like him as a dramatic performer as well. I like him very much in movies like Magnolia, which he was very good in Magnolia. Whenever I talk to my friends about how good an actor Tom Cruise is, they seem to forget that he was in Magnolia or movies like Born on the 4th of July. And I always make the argument, I think Tom Cruise is a better actor than Leo DiCaprio, and I kind of say that to piss my friends off, but it comes from some sentiment of reality as well. It's easy to hate on Tom Cruise because he's a wacky Scientologist, but he's ultimately a really good performer. He's like all you can ask for in an actor. He's like Jacky Chan, but he's able to really act as well. So I'm a big Tom Cruise fan. His early action movies, not so much. I'm more a fan of his dramatic work and his later action films. Let's talk about the movie now that I'm done gushing over Tom Cruise and basically the background behind me watching this movie. So the movie opens, beautiful shots, excellent cinematography, very exciting sequence. That opening sequence has so many beautiful shots. You can tell that this is real aerial acrobatics going on. It's not some phony CG bullshit. It's the real shit here, ladies and gentlemen. And that really gives a sense of danger right off the bat. It's this beautiful opening sequence that really has you on the edge of your seat, where Tom Cruise is flying alongside another plane, and the other plane's pilot is starting to freak out, and Tom Cruise kind of guides him to land. Very exciting sequence right there. And when I say this movie really feels dangerous and has real life stunts, well, actually, in this film, one of the stuntmen actually died. As a matter of fact, when they were filming the scene where, spoiler alert, Goose dies, a stuntman actually died while trying to perform that sequence, which gives a really big sense of danger. I knew that prior to watching this movie, and that added a sense of danger to the film. Now, obviously, I'm not promoting the death of stuntmen. That would be ridiculous. But it just goes to show how much danger there is into this. So after that opening sequence, the one thing that really struck me was the music. The music was mostly mixed and produced by someone by the name of Giorgio Moroder, who does a lot of film composition. Many people would probably know him because there's a Daft Punk song on their last album, which came out probably 10 years ago, but In Random Access Memories, there's a song called Jojo Moroder, and he was a heavy influence for Daft Punk. So if you guys know Daft Punk, Jojo Moroder kind of sounds like Daft Punk. But he produced a lot of the music in here, and he's produced other movies as well. He did the soundtrack of movies like The Paper Chase, and I don't really like that sound, to be quite honest. That very early 80s synthy sound is not really my cup of tea. The song by Kenny Loggins, the Highway to the Danger Zone, it always felt a little cheese to me. And that's basically what this movie is. It's cheese. It's big blockbuster cheese, and it's not ashamed to admit it. But besides the Kenny Loggins song, the song that's really iconic in here that many people recognize but don't realize that was written for Top Gun is the song Take My Breath Away. Bum, 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 bow, bow, bow. So while the music is not really my cup of tea, it's not really a sound that I gravitate towards. By no means do I just run on the treadmill listening to Kenny Loggins. It does fit the movie, and it helped add to the movie's success for sure. It has such a unique soundtrack that I'm sure part of the draw of the movie is its soundtrack. And I think another reason why people look at this movie back fondly, despite it kind of not being the best movie, is because of that iconic music. This movie really feels like an element of its time. It feels like a time capsule of 1986 with that music. The character that Tom Cruise plays is like a giant Chad. Everything really feels 80s. So I'm gonna admit it, I'm not really big into this movie. Something about me is my dad is actually a baby boomer, and I'm a zoomer. So I feel like there's a whole gap of generations that got skipped. So I never really grew up with that kind of movie. My dad, when he wanted to show me movies, he would show me stuff like The Exorcist. That's like one that my dad always shot at me, like, you gotta watch The Exorcist. He wouldn't really recommend me movies from like the 80s and 90s. So there's like a whole gap in my film knowledge, which is the 80s, and because of that, the sensibilities of the 1980s just don't really stick with me, kind of just because I didn't grow up with that. But I can still admire this film from a distance. The main problem I did have with this movie is that Tom Cruise's character, Maverick, is basically a Mary Sue, but a male version of a Mary Sue. So you're introduced to him, and he's the best pilot. Right off the bat, he's the best pilot. He starts off as the best pilot, and he's trying to prove to everyone else that he's the best pilot. So it's not like a Rocky movie where he has to train to become better. It's just him trying to prove that he's the best. And he has sex with his instructor, which is a pretty big Chad move, and she basically falls for him very easily, never has to struggle to win her over. She just drop dead falls in love with him. There's also a point in this movie when Goose dies. They make it a point that it wasn't Tom Cruise's fault, it was more of Val Kilmer's fault, which that would have made the story a bit more interesting if Tom Cruise was held responsible, seeing as that he's more of a by the hip, kind of I do my own thing, and all of a sudden him doing that lands him in trouble. That would have made the story a bit more interesting, but they kind of made it the fault of Val Kilmer's character, Iceman. So I really didn't feel anything for Tom Cruise, despite him being very cool. I will admit I did want to be Tom Cruise while watching this movie. I wanted to have sex with a hot aerial instructor while flying planes like a badass, but I just didn't really feel like I cared for his struggle all that much. And I feel like part of the reason for that, the reason why they didn't want Tom Cruise to look too bad, is because ultimately this film is very commercial. The way this film is produced feels like a military advertisement. And I don't know how many people who reminisce on this movie fondly realize that this movie is basically a US Army advertisement. That's all what the movie is to me. To the point where I was reading up on this movie, and apparently they had people outside of the movie theater recruiting people walking out of the theater. So this movie is basically propaganda. Now, is it well-shot propaganda? Yeah. Is it cheesy, fun propaganda? Sure. There's nothing wrong with propaganda. Bugs Bunny, for example, is like a cartoon that I remember fondly, but it's propaganda. There is a lot of propaganda in that. And a lot of the stuff that I grew up with, Indiana Jones, for example, does have some elements of propaganda. And of course, in Indiana Jones, they're paying tribute to serials which were known for propaganda. So I don't really take any points off for this movie for being inherently propaganda. All film is propaganda to a certain extent. A director is trying to give you a message, and in order to give that message, they have to pull a few strings. But I will give this movie points off for being too much a victim to that propaganda. They can't really take risks because they don't want to make the US Air Force look bad. This movie is also really remembered for having some very homosexual undertones, I would say. There's that clip of Quentin Tarantino in the movie Sleep With Me that goes viral on the internet. I always see it get recommended to me maybe like once every other year. But it's Tarantino talking about how Top Gun is mildly homosexual. It is a military movie. Militaries tend to have very unique bromances, kind of like, I don't know, football players. There is probably a little tap-ass that goes on in that locker room that's kind of not shown in the movie. I didn't really see it as being very homosexual. And besides, a lot of movies from the 80s did have that kind of like bromance to the point of like homoeroticism going on. One movie that comes to mind is Rocky 3. There's a scene where Apollo Creed is training Rocky and they're like hugging in the beach and it's all slow-mo and it's kind of gay. But yeah, the one scene that is pretty gay in the movie Top Gun is that volleyball sequence. That feels very gay. I don't have a problem with it. Like, it's what makes the movie interesting, after all, is how it's like just a bunch of guys slapping each other's butts around. They fly planes. There was one thing that really made me kind of weird, is I feel like they made the character of Goose kind of a cuck. There's like a part where they're at like a bar or something and Goose is playing piano, and Tom Cruise's character Maverick has his arm wrapped around Goose's girlfriend, and whenever Maverick talks to Goose's girlfriend, she's like almost in love with him. I'm like, bro, that destroys the bro code. You don't hit on another man's girl like that. Come on. Yeah, that's basically my problem with the movie. It feels very propaganda-y, which I don't think is a problem inherently, but it kind of affects my ability to care for the character. The fact that they didn't want to make Tom Cruise's character look bad kind of makes you not care for Tom Cruise. But I get it. People don't really like this movie because of its strong narrative or deep, heady themes. They like it because it's cheeseball. Really exciting action scenes and a lovey-dovey love story. It's everything you can ask for in a big budget blockbuster. So I don't think people care that much that Tom Cruise's character is a bit plain and one-dimensional. But I'm just judging the movie objectively here as someone who hasn't grown up watching this movie. Yeah, that's all I have to say about Top Gun. That's my first impressions. Not the best movie out there. It has its charm. It's rooted in 80s culture, which is like a culture I'm not that familiar with because of the reasons I explained. So I don't have that fond an attachment to this movie. Also, I'm watching it for the first time when I'm 24, so it is what it is. But guys, did you grow up with Top Gun? Do you like Top Gun? Are you yelling at your computer screen right now saying, Paul, you're a big dork and you better like Top Gun? That said, hey, I'm really excited to see Top Gun Maverick because all of the trailers have been freaking wild and I'm so excited to see that one. Just because I'm not a big fan of this movie doesn't mean I'm not going to watch Maverick. But anyway, comment down below what are your thoughts on Top Gun. I'll see you guys around.
Tom Cruise, Kelly McGillis. Top Gun.